El Niño is not a storm but rather a weather phenomenon in the Pacific Ocean. During an El Niño, the surface water temperature warms up, leading to complex weather patterns. South American fishermen in the 19th century, describing warmer waters during Christmas time, coined the name El Niño, Spanish for the blessed child. Nowadays, when sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific Ocean rise 0.5 degrees Celsius over their historic average for 3 consecutive months, and once atmospheric conditions and rainfall patterns shift accordingly, scientists officially declare an El Niño. An El Niño event takes place about every 2 to 7 years. Normal east to west trade winds over the Pacific weaken and warm water that normally travels westward is now moving toward the east. Moisture then rises into the air and the effects of El Niño are felt throughout the Americas. In the ocean, warm water pushes colder water downward, blocking the important upwelling of nutrient-rich waters from the bottom. This causes some marine life to migrate to colder waters. Animals that normally feed on the sea life suffer, and fisheries throughout Central and South America suffer, too. Acid rain is any form of precipitation with high levels of nitric and sulfuric acids. It can occur in the form of snow, fog, and even dry materials that settle to earth. Most acid rain is caused by human activities. When people burn fossil fuels, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides are released into the atmosphere. These gases react with water, oxygen, and other substances to form sulfuric and nitric acid. Winds may spread these acidic solutions over hundreds of miles. After it falls to earth, acid rain enters water systems as runoff and sinks into the ground. This can make water toxic to prey, clams, fish, and other aquatic animals. The rest of the food chain, including non-aquatic species such as birds, is often affected as well. As acid rain also harms forests by damaging trees' leaves, robbing the soil of essential nutrients and making it hard for trees to take up water. By designing cleaner power plants and using fewer fossil fuels, we can reduce the number of pollutants that create acid rain. The Galapagos Islands are like a biological ark in the eastern Pacific Ocean. There are giant tortoises and swimming iguanas and numerous creatures found nowhere else. It's one of the world's most protected places. But scientists have discovered that dozens of exotic species have invaded the Galapagos underwater. NPR's Christopher Joyce reports on this unexpected finding. Christopher Joyce, byline, marine biologist James Carlton remembers when he first got to thinking that the Galapagos Islands may not be as pristine as people thought. James Carlton, on my first visit to the Galapagos, I collected some samples from a boat bottom. Joyce, barnacles, sponges and other hitchhikers. That was 1987. Carlton didn't know if those creatures he found were native or not, so 4 years ago, he and a team of scientists decided to return and take a closer look. Carlton, we didn't know quite what to expect. Joyce, what they did know was that on land there were lots of invasive species that are not native to the islands. But in the surrounding ocean, scientists only knew of 5 invaders, everything else presumably was native. When Carlton's team looked underwater, however, they found a horde of invaders. Green chemistry is a concept designed to develop with minimal damage to the environment, or in an environmentally technologies which allow chemistry to be practiced compatible way, and it's meant to cover both chemical processes and chemical products. The center was set up about 7 or 8 years ago. And the idea was to provide a hub of activities that covered fundamental research work, international collaboration, but also educational development on public of the project as well, and also networking, so we network out to well over 1,000 people around the globe. What I'm trying to understand, and what other colleagues of mine are trying to understand, is how we moved from that cold climate condition to the warm climate condition that we enjoy today. We know from ice core research that the transition from these cold conditions to warm conditions wasn't smooth, as you might predict from the slow increase in solar radiation. And we know this from ice cores, because if you drill down into ice, you find annual bands of ice, and you can see this in the iceberg. You can see those blue-white layers. Gases are trapped in the ice cores, so we can measure CO2. That's why we know CO2 was lower in the past, and the chemistry of the ice also tells us about temperature in the polar regions. The way I look back in the past by using the fossilized remains of deepwater corals. You can see an image of these corals behind me. It was collected from close to Antarctica, thousands of meters below the sea, so very different than the kinds of corals you may have been lucky enough to see if you've had a tropical holiday. So, I'm hoping that this talk will give you a 4-dimensional view of ocean. 2 dimensions, such as this beautiful 2-dimensional image of the sea surface temperature. This was taken using satellite, so it's got tremendous spatial resolution. The overall features are extremely easy to understand. The equatorial regions are warm because there's more sunlight. The polar regions are cold because there's less sunlight. And that allows big ice caps to build up on Antarctica and up in the northern hemisphere. It seems to me that architecture is pretty much something that causes us both pleasure and trouble. I live in the part of Western London where I think many of the streets are really ugly, and this distresses me every time when I walk to a supermarket or walk to the tube. I do not understand why they built those buildings without architecture. A bad building has a serious impact on the people around it, which could be hundreds of years. It lasted so long, and if you write a bad book or a bad play, I will be shocked when it was shown. Suppose the book arose a little bit from the frustration, and then I realize if you talk about architecture, you will say why buildings are not more beautiful. Then you will say I can use such work as beauty, which is a really arrogant word. And no one knows what beautiful is. It's all in the eye of the beholder. I couldn't help but think about that actually. Well, you know that we all attempt to agree that Rome is nice than milk kickings, and San Francisco has the edge of Frankfurt, so we can make that sort of generalization. Surely they are something we can say about why a building works or why it doesn't. So the books really attempt to suggest why architecture works when it does and what might go wrong when it doesn't work. There are many reasons why Japanese people live longer than the rest of us. One reason might be soybean products like tofu, natto and miso. Scientists from the National Institute of Health and Nutrition in Tokyo conducted a study into the health benefits of soybeans and their products. They found that people who regularly ate tofu, natto and miso were 10% less likely to die from common killers than people who ate no soybean products. Researchers said eating soybean-based food lowered the risk of death from heart attacks, stroke and other cardiovascular problems. They said, a higher intake of fermented soy products was associated with a lower risk of mortality. In families, workplace, community, there is people you can realize, oh yeah, they are doing that. They're seducing this person and attacking that person. And then they divide the community by doing that. They get other people that agree with them to attack the people they're attacking. And in mental health terms, it's called splitting. For you split people into all good and all bad. And splitting is associated with borderline and narcissistic personality disorders. People honestly see the world in these all good, all bad ways. But it's contagious. And so they tell half the people, you're wonderful, and half people, you're terrible. And those people start fighting each other. And while they're fighting each other, the high conflict person gets to dominate the community. So I'm calling this the community. It could be the family. It could be the workplace. It could be a neighborhood. We see this in all areas of life, when there's well, there are many factors that can cause one species to divide into two. One of these is when populations get isolated from each other by something like a lake forming or forest being cleared. And there's another idea that as individuals adapt to their environment, this might have a knock-on effect on mate choice, a process called sensory drive speciation. Now this seems to occur in cichlid fish. They have shown that a female preference for either red or blue striped males only exists in clear water, where they are actually able to see. Social capital is a concept that was introduced by sociologists many years ago. It's actually the networks and resources that people use to deliver social outcomes. For instance, it might be holding a sporting event, running a community fete, being part of a club. It is difficult to measure social capital, and one way of looking at it is the extent that people volunteer in their local community. So you can consider the volunteering rate as an indicator for how healthy a community is. You can also look at something called a well-being index, the way people think about their lives and how trusting they are of others. Their general perception of the value of their life.
There is a skeleton in every house. Paul travels a lot on business. My girlfriend is often away on business trips.